The sting of my son's slap still burns on my cheek, and the emptiness in my safe has left a cold hollow in my chest. That $30,000 wasn't just money, it was my life savings, the last security I had left in this world. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Rose, and I'm 73 years old. I've lived in the same small apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan for 42 years. The walls have watched me raise 2 children, bury a husband, and somehow keep going when everything else fell apart. Every morning, the smell of coffee mingles with the distant rumble of city life, the honk of taxis threading through Columbus Avenue, the chatter from the corner deli where Mr. Kim always saves me the ripest tomatoes. But inside these 4 walls, my world had become quieter, heavier, suffocating in ways I didn't want to admit. I remember that morning in September like it happened yesterday. I'd woken with hope fluttering in my chest, expecting a visit from my son Michael. 45 years old and still my baby, or so I told myself. I'd spent the entire morning cooking his favorite meal, spaghetti bolognese with extra garlic, the way he liked it when he was 8 years old and would climb onto the kitchen counter to watch me stir the sauce. The apartment smelled like oregano and memories. I'd set the table with my good china, the set I'd saved for 20 years to buy, each piece a small victory against the bills that never seemed to stop coming. The buzzer rang at exactly 2 o'clock. My heart jumped like a schoolgirl's. I pressed the button to let him up, smoothing down my worn cardigan, the same blue one I'd worn when we first moved to this apartment decades ago, back when Tom was still alive and Michael still hugged me goodnight. I could hear his footsteps in the hallway, heavy and hurried. Something was different. The rhythm was wrong. The door barely cracked open before coldness swept in. Not the autumn chill from outside, but something worse. Something that made my bones ache with recognition. Michael's face was hard, his eyes avoiding mine. Before I could say hello, before I could tell him about the meal waiting on the stove, his hand came across my face. The slap echoed in my small kitchen like a gunshot. "Where is it?" he demanded. His voice was a stranger's voice. Cold. Entitled. Furious. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat spread across my skin. In 45 years of being his mother, through scraped knees and broken hearts and all the ways I'd failed and tried again, he had never laid a hand on me. Never. "Michael, what? The money, Mom. I know you have it. I need it now." That's when I saw it. The safe in my bedroom closet, the one I thought was hidden behind old coats and forgotten Christmas decorations. The door hung open like a wound. $30,000. Gone. My life savings, accumulated penny by penny from Social Security checks and the small inheritance Tom had left me. The money I'd planned to leave to my children when I died. The security that helped me sleep at night in a city where rent never stops climbing. He was already at the door, my money stuffed in his jacket pockets. I watched him leave without another word, without looking back. The spaghetti sauce continued to simmer on the stove, filling the apartment with the smell of a love that had just been stolen and slapped away. I sank into my kitchen chair, the same chair where I'd fed Michael breakfast before school every morning for 18 years. The photo on the mantel caught my eye, him at age 7, holding my hand tightly as we walked through Central Park, both of us laughing at something I could no longer remember. That little boy with the gap-toothed smile seemed like another lifetime. A different child entirely. That day shattered every illusion I'd been carrying. The illusion that unconditional love was always enough. The illusion that being a good mother meant accepting everything, forgiving everything, giving everything until there was nothing left of yourself. But Michael wasn't always like this. I need you to understand that. The man who slapped me and stole from me wasn't the child I raised. Or maybe he was, and I'd been blind to it for too long. I remember those early years in Brooklyn, before we moved to Manhattan. I was working double shifts cleaning offices in downtown buildings that scraped the sky. My hands were raw from industrial soap and my back ached from bending over desks where important people made decisions about money I'd never see. But every paycheck, every spare penny, went to Michael and his sister Lisa. Piano lessons. Soccer uniforms. The braces he needed for his crooked smile. The college fund that grew dollar by dollar while my own needs got smaller and smaller. "Mom, you shouldn't give me so much," he'd sometimes protest, but even then I could see the expectation in his eyes. The assumption that I would always say yes, always find a way, always put his needs before my own. "You deserve it, sweetheart," I'd tell him, ignoring the tension that was already tightening in my chest like a slowly closing fist. "You deserve everything I can give you." When he was 25 and asked to borrow $50 for dinner with friends, I gave him $100. When he was 30 and needed help with rent, I emptied my savings account. When he was 35 and his business failed, I took out a loan against my apartment to help him start over. Every time, I told myself this was what mothers did. This was love. "Can you help me out just this once, Mom?" became a refrain that played on repeat for 20 years. Just this once turned into once a month, then once a week, then whenever he needed something he didn't want to work for himself. When he failed his college classes the first time, I paid for him to retake them. When he ignored my calls for months, I forgave him when he finally came back, always with some crisis that required my immediate financial attention. When he missed my birthday, I made excuses. When he missed Tom's funeral 2 years ago, claiming he couldn't get time off work, I swallowed the hurt and tried to understand. "You don't understand what it's like out there," he'd say whenever I tried to suggest he might need to take more responsibility for his own life. The conversations would end there, heavy with unspoken accusations and my own growing sense that something fundamental was broken between us. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie in bed and wonder if I was his mother or just his personal ATM, open 24 hours a day, always reliable, never charging interest, never asking for anything in return except the hope that maybe this time, this latest crisis, would be the last one. The line between love and obligation had blurred so completely that I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Every phone call became a source of anxiety. What would he need this time? How much would it cost me? How would I explain to my own creditors that I'd chosen my adult son's problems over my own survival? But I kept giving. Because isn't that what mothers do? Isn't that what love looks like? For months leading up to that September day, the signs had been there. I just didn't want to see them. My 70th birthday had come and gone without a word from Michael. I'd baked myself a small cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, the same kind I'd made for his birthdays every year until he turned 30 and decided he was too busy for family celebrations. I'd waited by the phone all day, jumping every time it rang, but it was always someone else. Lisa called from California, where she'd moved to get away from what she diplomatically called family drama. Rosa from across the hall stopped by with flowers. Even Mr. Kim from the deli sent his grandson up with a free apple pie. But Michael? Nothing. Not a call, not a text, not even one of those generic happy birthday messages you can send with a single click. When I developed a terrible flu last winter, the kind that left me bedridden and scared in a way I hadn't been since Tom died, I called Michael for help. Just to bring groceries, maybe pick up my medication from the pharmacy 3 blocks away. "I'm too busy right now, Mom," he told me. "Can't you order delivery or something?" I was too weak to argue, too proud to beg. I survived on canned soup and the kindness of neighbors until the fever broke a week later. The excuses became more elaborate, more insulting. He was always just about to get a promotion that would solve all his problems. Always dealing with some crisis that was more important than spending time with the woman who'd given him life and 45 years of unwavering support. Always promising to pay me back, to visit more often, to be the son I remembered from those early years when he actually seemed to love me. But that afternoon in September, when the harsh light streaming through my bedroom window illuminated my open safe, I finally saw the truth I'd been avoiding. The $30,000 wasn't just missing. It had been taken carefully, methodically. Someone had known exactly where I kept it, exactly how the combination lock worked, exactly which bills were which denominations. Someone had planned this theft down to the last detail. My legs gave out beneath me. I sank into the rocking chair Tom had bought me when I was pregnant with Michael, the chair where I'd nursed him and sung him lullabies and rocked him through countless nights when he couldn't sleep. The irony wasn't lost on me, sitting in that chair, realizing that the baby I'd comforted there had grown up to steal my future. The teacup in my hands, my favorite one, with tiny roses painted around the rim, slipped from my fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor. The sound was startling in the quiet apartment, sharp and final. Like something breaking that could never be put back together. I stared at the broken pieces for a long time, thinking about all the things in my life that had broken quietly, without anyone noticing. My marriage, worn down by years of financial stress caused by supporting adult children who took everything and gave nothing back. My health, compromised by working too many hours to pay for other people's mistakes. My sense of self, eroded bit by bit every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I smiled when I wanted to scream, every time I gave money I couldn't afford to lose. The tears came slowly at first, then in waves that made my whole body shake. I cried for the little boy in the photograph who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. I cried for the young woman I'd been, so full of hope and determination, so sure that love would be enough to create the family I'd dreamed of. I cried for all the birthdays he'd missed, all the times I'd made excuses for behavior that had no excuse, all the red flags I'd ignored because acknowledging them would have meant admitting that I'd failed at the thing that mattered most to me. But somewhere in the midst of that breakdown, something else emerged. Something I hadn't felt in decades. Anger. Pure, clean anger that cut through the fog of martyrdom I'd been living in. For the first time in Michael's life, the word no surfaced in my mind. Soft at first, tentative, but growing stronger. No, I would not keep enabling this. No, I would not keep sacrificing my security for his selfishness. No, I would not die poor and alone just to keep funding the lifestyle of a man who couldn't even be bothered to call on my birthday. I feared loneliness. I'd been afraid of it since Tom died, but I was beginning to realize there were worse things than being alone. Like being surrounded by people who only loved you for what you could give them. Like spending your final years wondering if your own children would miss you when you were gone, or if they'd just miss your checkbook. That evening, I packed away the photo albums that had been gathering dust on my living room shelves. Page after page of memories, Michael's first steps, his kindergarten graduation, the day he graduated high school despite failing 3 classes his senior year, Lisa's wedding where he'd missed the ceremony because he'd overslept after a night of drinking. Each photo felt heavy in my hands, weighted with years of disappointment disguised as unconditional love. I carried the albums to the closet where my safe used to protect my future, and I closed the door on all of it. The past, the excuses, the pattern of giving until it hurt and then giving some more. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror that night, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. 73 years old, with silver hair that needed cutting and eyes that had seen too much. But for the first time in years, those eyes weren't looking away from the truth. They were staring it down, ready for a fight. The next morning, when my phone rang at 7 a.m. with Michael's name on the caller ID, my hand hovered over the screen for 30 seconds before I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear another excuse, another crisis, another plea for money I no longer had to give. The voicemail was predictable. He needed $5,000 by Friday for some emergency he couldn't explain in detail. He'd pay me back as soon as his next business deal came through. He loved me and appreciated everything I'd done for him over the years. The same words he'd been using for 2 decades, delivered with the casual expectation of someone who'd never been told no by the person who mattered most. But when I called him back that afternoon, my voice was steadier than it had been in years. "No, Michael," I said, and the word felt foreign on my tongue. "I can't help you this time." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Harder. The mask of filial affection slipping away to reveal something uglier underneath. "What do you mean, you can't help me? You're my mother. This is what mothers do." "Not anymore," I replied, and hung up. The confrontation I'd been avoiding my entire adult life was about to begin. And I had no idea if I was strong enough for what was coming. When I finally confronted Michael about the missing money 3 days later, his reaction told me everything I needed to know about who he really was underneath all my delusions about motherly love. He arrived at my apartment with Lisa in tow, my daughter, my only daughter, who I'd hoped might understand what her brother had done to me. But the moment they walked through my door, I realized this wasn't going to be the reunion I'd been quietly hoping for. This was an intervention. Against me. "Mom," Lisa started, her voice carrying that condescending tone she'd perfected during her years as a therapist in California. "Michael told me you're upset about some misunderstanding with money." Misunderstanding. As if $30,000 could simply be misplaced like car keys or reading glasses. Michael sat on my couch, the same couch where I'd read him bedtime stories and helped him with homework and listened to his problems when he was young enough to still need me for something other than financial bailouts. His eyes darted around the room, landing everywhere except on my face. "Mom, it's not what you think," he mumbled, picking at a loose thread on one of my throw pillows. "I was going to pay it back. You know I'm good for it." Good for it. 20 years of empty promises, and he still expected me to believe he was good for it. "When?" I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "When were you planning to pay back the $30,000 you took from my safe? The same way you paid back the $5,000 I gave you last Christmas? Or the $10,000 I lent you when your business failed? Or the $15,000 I gave you for your divorce lawyer?" The numbers hung in the air between us like an indictment. $50,000 over the past 2 years alone. Money I'd saved from Social Security checks and the small pension Tom had left me. Money that was supposed to keep me fed and housed and secure in my old age. Lisa shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, you're being dramatic. Family helps family. That's how it works." "Help," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling theft now?" Michael's head snapped up, and for a moment I saw a flash of the rage that had been hiding beneath his sheepish exterior. "Theft? I'm your son. Everything you have is going to be mine eventually anyway. I just needed it sooner." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Everything I have was going to be his eventually anyway. As if I were already dead. As if my life, my security, my peace of mind were just inconvenient obstacles standing between him and his inheritance. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, let's not," Lisa started. "Get out of my apartment. Both of you. Now." Michael stood up, his face twisting into an expression I'd never seen before. Pure contempt. "Fine. But don't come crawling back to us when you're dying alone in some nursing home. Don't expect us to take care of you when you need us. The threat was clear. Love me or lose me, but in reverse. Fund my lifestyle or lose your family. Continue to be my personal ATM or spend your final years completely alone. After they left, the apartment felt different. Emptier, but also cleaner somehow. Like an infection had been drained from a wound I didn't even know I had. But the loneliness was immediate and crushing. For 45 years, my identity had been wrapped up in being Michael's mother, Lisa's mother, the woman who would sacrifice anything for her children. Without that role, who was I? That's when Rosa knocked on my door. Rosa Delgado had lived across the hall from me for 15 years, ever since her husband died and she moved to Manhattan to be closer to her grandchildren. A retired elementary school teacher with sharp dark eyes and a laugh that could be heard 3 apartments away. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the years, borrowed cups of sugar and complained about the building's ancient heating system, but we'd never been what you'd call close friends. I heard shouting, she said when I opened the door, my eyes still red from crying. Are you all right, Rose? Something about the way she said my name, with genuine concern instead of obligation or expectation, broke open whatever composure I'd been clinging to. My son stole my life savings, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. And my daughter thinks I'm being dramatic for being upset about it. Rosa stepped into my apartment without invitation, took one look around at the broken teacup pieces I still hadn't cleaned up, and pulled me into a hug that smelled like vanilla perfume and comfort I'd forgotten existed. Honey, she said, you deserve so much better than this. Those 7 words were a revelation. I deserve better. When had I stopped believing that? When had I started accepting scraps of affection from people who were supposed to love me unconditionally? Rosa helped me clean up the broken cup, made us both tea, and listened while I told her everything. 20 years of financial abuse disguised as family obligation. Holidays spent alone while my children were too busy to visit but never too busy to ask for money. Birthdays forgotten, illnesses ignored, and a lifetime of putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own until I'd forgotten I had needs at all. What are you going to do? She asked when I finished talking. I don't know, I admitted. I've never said no to them before. I don't even know how. You start small, Rosa said. And you start now. That night, when Michael called to apologize, not for stealing from me, but for raising his voice, I let the call go to voicemail. When Lisa texted asking if we could work this out like adults, I turned off my phone. When the guilt threatened to drown me, I thought about Rosa's words. You deserve better. For the first time in decades, I slept through the night without waking up worried about someone else's problems. Without wondering what crisis would greet me in the morning or how much it would cost me to fix it. It was the beginning of learning how to put myself first. But it was going to be harder than I ever imagined. The phone calls became more frequent after that. Not just from Michael, but from Lisa, from Tom's brother Frank who never called except when he wanted something, from family friends who'd heard through the grapevine that there was trouble between me and my children. Everyone had an opinion about what I should do. Most of those opinions involved me apologizing, making peace, and going back to being the family ATM I'd always been. After all, they're your children. Family is everything. You only get one mother, and they only get one you. The pressure was enormous. 73 years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. Every time my phone rang, my first instinct was to answer it, to fix whatever was wrong, to smooth over the conflict with my checkbook and my willingness to be hurt if it meant keeping everyone else happy. But Rosa was there, reminding me that I had value beyond what I could provide for other people. She introduced me to her neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Chen, whose daughter had stolen her jewelry and sold it for drug money. To Mr. Rodriguez from the 3rd floor, whose son had forged his signature on loan documents and nearly gotten him evicted. I wasn't alone in this. There was a whole community of older adults who'd been taken advantage of by the people they'd loved most. People who'd given everything and received nothing but exploitation in return. People who'd been made to feel guilty for wanting basic respect and dignity in their own homes. The revelation was both comforting and heartbreaking. How many of us were there? How many mothers and fathers were lying awake at night, wondering what they'd done wrong to deserve children who saw them as nothing more than a source of money and free labor? 3 weeks after the theft, I made my first real decision as an independent person rather than someone's mother. I called a lawyer. The decision to pursue legal action against Michael wasn't easy. Every bone in my body screamed against it. You don't sue your own children. You don't air family business in public. You forgive, you forget, you move on because that's what loving parents do. But I wasn't just a parent anymore. I was a 73-year-old woman who'd been robbed by someone she'd trusted completely. And if Michael had been anyone else, a neighbor, a stranger, even a friend, there would be no question about what the appropriate response was. The lawyer, Martha Stedman, was probably my age, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and glasses that made her look like the librarian I'd wanted to be when I was young. Her office was in Midtown, on the 15th floor of a building that used to intimidate me with its marble lobby and uniformed doormen. But sitting across from her desk, explaining what my son had done to me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. I felt entitled to justice. Theft is theft, Martha said simply. It doesn't matter if it was committed by a family member. In fact, elder financial abuse carries additional penalties precisely because it involves taking advantage of trust relationships. Elder financial abuse? I'd never heard the term before, but it described perfectly what had been happening to me for years. The gradual erosion of my financial security by people who were supposed to protect me. The normalization of being treated like a resource rather than a person. Are you sure you want to proceed with this? Martha asked. Family court cases can be emotionally difficult, especially when there are other relatives involved who might not support your decision. I thought about Michael's face when he told me everything I had was going to be his eventually anyway. I thought about Lisa calling my reaction to being robbed dramatic. I thought about the $30,000 that was supposed to keep me safe in my old age, gone in service of a man who couldn't even be bothered to call on my birthday. I'm sure, I said. The process of filing charges was both complicated and strangely liberating. Police reports, financial documentation, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen Michael entering my apartment at odd hours when I wasn't home. Each piece of paper was evidence that I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't being the hysterical old woman my children had painted me as. The hardest part was the phone call from Lisa after she received the court summons. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" she sobbed into the phone. "He's your son. Our family is going to be destroyed." Our family was destroyed the moment he decided I was worth more to him as a victim than as a mother, I replied. But what will people think? There it was. The question that had controlled my entire life. What will people think? What will the neighbors say? What will everyone at church whisper about? How will this reflect on me as a mother? I don't care anymore, I said, and realized I meant it. I care more about being treated with basic human dignity than I care about maintaining the illusion that we're a happy family. The silence on the other end of the call lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," Lisa finally said. "And when you're old and sick and need us to take care of you, remember that you chose lawsuits over love." But it wasn't lawsuits over love. It was boundaries over exploitation. Self-respect over enabling. It was choosing to be a person instead of just a source of money and guilt. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about Tom. What would he have said about all this? Would he have supported my decision to take legal action against our son, or would he have urged me to keep the peace at any cost? I think he would have been proud of me. Tom was a gentle man, but he wasn't a pushover. He'd worked construction for 40 years, and he understood the value of hard work and fair treatment. He'd seen me give and give to our children long past the point of reasonableness, and sometimes I'd catch him watching me with concern in his eyes. "Rose," he'd say after I'd written another check for another crisis, "you can't love someone into being responsible." I'd brushed off his concerns back then. "There are children," I'd tell him. "This is what parents do." But now I wondered if Tom had seen what I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. That our love wasn't helping Michael grow up. It was enabling him to remain a selfish child in a 45-year-old body. The weeks leading up to the court date were the longest of my life. Michael alternated between ignoring me completely and sending long, rambling text messages about how hurt he was by my betrayal. Lisa called twice a week, sometimes to yell at me about destroying the family, sometimes to beg me to drop the charges and handle this privately. But I wasn't handling it privately anymore. Privacy had been the weapon they'd used against me for years. Keep it in the family. Don't let anyone know how bad things really are. Pretend everything is fine while you slowly die inside from the stress of being everyone's personal bank account. Rosa became my lifeline during those weeks. She'd bring dinner when I was too anxious to cook, sit with me when the doubt threatened to overwhelm my resolve, and remind me over and over again that I was doing the right thing. "My Ricardo tried this with me 10 years ago," she told me one evening as we sat on her small balcony overlooking the busy street below. "Started showing up at my apartment when I wasn't home, going through my things, taking money from my purse. I caught him one day, and he had the nerve to tell me I was selfish for keeping money I didn't need when he had bills to pay. What did you do?" I changed my locks and told him he wasn't welcome anymore unless he could treat me with respect. She sipped her coffee and watched the traffic crawl by below us. Hardest thing I ever did. But you know what? 2 years later, he apologized. Really apologized, not just because he wanted something. He got his life together, got a job he could be proud of, and now we have a relationship based on love instead of money. Do you think that could happen with Michael? Rosa was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, honey. Some people change when they hit rock bottom. Others just dig deeper. But either way, you can't live your life being afraid of other people's choices. You can only control your own. The court date was set for a Tuesday morning in November. I remember the date exactly, November 15th, because it was the day I stopped being just Michael's mother and became Rose again. A person in my own right, with her own value and her own rights. The courthouse was in downtown Manhattan, an imposing building that made me feel small as I climbed the steps in my best dress, navy blue with small pearl buttons, the dress I'd bought for Tom's funeral but never worn because it seemed too nice for grieving. Today, it felt appropriate. I was burying something, but it wasn't grief I was wearing. It was dignity. Martha met me in the hallway outside the courtroom. She looked professional and confident in her dark suit, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that my own son had stolen from me. Bank records, photographs of the empty safe, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen Michael coming and going from my apartment at unusual hours. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. I thought about the question seriously. Was I ready to sit in a public courtroom and detail how my own child had betrayed me? Was I ready to see my family drama played out in front of strangers? Was I ready for the possibility that Michael might actually face consequences for what he'd done? "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly green. There were maybe 20 people scattered across the wooden benches, other cases waiting to be heard, court officials, a few elderly spectators who looked like they might be dealing with similar family situations. And there, at the defendant's table, sat Michael. My son. My baby. The little boy who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms and tell me he loved me to the moon and back. He looked older than his 45 years. His hair was thinning, and he'd gained weight around his middle that made him look soft and dissatisfied with life. He was wearing a wrinkled suit that probably came from a discount store, and he kept shifting in his seat like a child being forced to sit through church. Lisa sat behind him in the gallery, her face a mask of controlled fury. She was staring at me with the kind of hatred I'd never seen from her before. My own daughter, looking at me like I was her enemy instead of the woman who'd given her life and 25 years of unwavering support. When the judge called our case, my legs felt shaky as I stood up. Judge Patricia Morrison was probably in her 60s, with short silver hair and eyes that had clearly seen every kind of family dysfunction imaginable. She looked at the papers in front of her, then at Michael, then at me. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, "you're alleging that your son, Michael Patterson, stole $30,000 from your home?" "Yes, Your Honor." My voice came out steadier than I'd expected. "And Mr. Patterson, how do you plead to the charge of elder financial abuse in the third degree?" Elder financial abuse? Hearing the words in that official setting, with all their legal weight, made the reality of my situation crystal clear. I hadn't just been robbed. I'd been systematically abused by someone who was supposed to love and protect me. Michael stood up slowly. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Of course he pled not guilty. Even now, even caught red-handed with my money in his pockets and witnesses who'd seen him leaving my apartment, he couldn't take responsibility for what he'd done. The trial lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of laying bare 20 years of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and broken trust. Martha presented evidence methodically, bank records showing the pattern of my financial support over the years, photographs of my empty safe, testimony from Rosa about the suspicious timing of Michael's visits to my apartment. When they called me to testify, I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The Bible was heavy in my hands as I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. "Mrs. Patterson," Martha began, "can you describe your relationship with your son prior to September 15th of this year?" I looked at Michael, sitting at the defendant's table with his court-appointed lawyer, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. For a moment I felt the old familiar tug of maternal protection. The urge to minimize, to make excuses, to protect him from the consequences of his own actions. Then I remembered the feeling of his hand across my face. The casual cruelty in his voice when he told me everything I had was going to be his eventually anyway. The $30,000 that was supposed to be my security blanket in old age. I gave him everything, I said into the microphone. For 20 years, every time he called with a crisis, I emptied my bank account. I took out loans I couldn't afford. I worked extra hours cleaning office buildings until my arthritis made it impossible to continue. I gave him money for rent, for business ventures, for divorce lawyers, for emergencies that never seemed to end. And what did you receive in return? I thought about the question. What had I received in return for 2 decades of financial support? Missed birthdays, ignored holidays, phone calls only when he needed something. The slow realization that I was valued more as a resource than as a person. "Nothing," I said finally. I received nothing but the promise that he would pay me back someday, and the knowledge that if I ever said no, I would lose him completely. "Can you tell the court about September 15th? I described that day in detail. The slap that left a mark on my face for a week. The empty safe. The money that represented my entire future, gone in the space of minutes. When Martha finished her questions, Michael's lawyer had his turn. He was young and inexperienced, and his strategy seemed to be painting me as a vengeful mother who was exaggerating a simple family disagreement. Mrs. Patterson, he began, isn't it true that you've been giving money to your son voluntarily for many years? Yes. And isn't it also true that family members often have access to each other's homes and personal belongings? I saw where he was going with this. Make it seem like the theft was just a natural extension of our family's financial arrangements. Normalize the violation of trust, the assault, the casual assumption that my money belonged to him. He slapped me, I said quietly. He hit me and then took money that wasn't his. That's not a family disagreement. That's assault and theft. But you've never pressed charges before for any of the money you've given him over the years. Because I gave it voluntarily before. This time, he took it without permission. That's called stealing. The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of the court reporter's fingers on her machine and the distant hum of traffic outside. I looked at Michael, hoping to see some sign of remorse, some acknowledgement that he understood what he'd done to me. Instead, his face was blank. Not angry, not sad, not ashamed. Just empty. Like I was a stranger instead of the woman who'd carried him in her body for 9 months and loved him unconditionally for 45 years. When it was Michael's turn to testify, he took the stand with the same casual attitude he'd brought to every crisis in his adult life. Someone else's problem, someone else's fault, someone else's responsibility to fix. His testimony was a masterpiece of deflection and victim blaming. Yes, he'd taken the money, but he needed it and he was planning to pay it back eventually. Yes, he'd been upset when I told him no about the loan, but he would never hurt me intentionally. His mother was confused about what had happened, probably because of her age, and she was making a bigger deal out of this than it needed to be. I love my mother, he said, looking directly at me for the first time that day. Everything I did was out of love. I never meant to hurt her. Love. He was still calling it love, even as he sat in a courtroom denying responsibility for assaulting and robbing me. That's when something inside me finally snapped. Not in a dramatic way. I didn't scream or cry or make a scene. I simply reached into my purse and pulled out the photograph I'd been carrying there for 3 weeks. The one from his 7th birthday, where he was holding my hand and smiling up at me like I was the most wonderful person in the world. The courtroom was dead silent as I slowly tore that photograph in half. Then in half again. The pieces fluttered to the floor like autumn leaves, 45 years of unconditional love reduced to scraps of paper at my feet. That, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the small courtroom, is not love. Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't hit. Love doesn't treat another person like a bank account with legs. Judge Morrison watched the pieces of photograph settle on the courtroom floor, then looked back at me with something that might have been respect. Mrs. Patterson, she said gently, is there anything else you'd like to say? I stood up slowly, using the wooden rail to steady myself. My arthritis was acting up from the stress, but my voice was stronger than it had been in years. Your Honor, I spent 45 years being Michael's mother. I sacrificed my own security, my own needs, my own dreams to make sure he had everything I never did. I thought that was love. I thought that was what good mothers do. I looked at Michael, who was staring at the torn pieces of photograph with an expression I couldn't read. But love isn't supposed to be one-sided. Love isn't supposed to hurt. And love isn't supposed to leave you broken and afraid in your own home. I took a shaky breath. I will no longer buy love with my bank account. I will no longer accept abuse disguised as family obligation. Respect me or lose me. Those are the only choices left. The silence in the courtroom felt sacred, like the moment after a prayer when you're waiting to see if anyone has been listening. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. You may be seated. The rest of the proceedings felt like they were happening to someone else. Closing arguments, judicial deliberation, the formal reading of the verdict. Michael was found guilty of elder financial abuse in the 3rd degree and petty larceny. He was sentenced to community service, restitution of the full $30,000, and 2 years probation. But the real verdict had already been delivered. The moment I tore up that photograph, I declared my independence from a relationship that had been slowly killing me for decades. After the judge's gavel fell and the courtroom began to empty, Lisa approached me in the hallway. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes still held that familiar anger. Are you happy now? She demanded. Are you satisfied? You've destroyed our family over money. I didn't destroy anything, I replied calmly. I simply refused to let it continue destroying me. He's your son, she said, as if that explained everything. As if being someone's parent meant accepting any treatment they chose to dish out. And I'm his mother, I replied. Which means I love him enough to stop enabling him to be someone I can't respect. Lisa stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling to reconcile the woman standing in front of her with the pushover mother she'd always known. "Don't expect us to be there for you when you need us," she said finally. The same threat Michael had made after I'd thrown him out of my apartment. The implication that love was conditional on my willingness to be used. "I don't," I said simply. "I expect to take care of myself." Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in decades. Not happy, the destruction of my relationship with my children wasn't something to celebrate. But free. Free from the constant anxiety about money, free from the guilt about never doing enough, free from the exhaustion of loving people who only loved me for what I could provide. Martha walked me to the subway station, her briefcase heavy with legal documents that proved I'd been right to stand up for myself. "What happens now?" I asked as we reached the turnstiles. "Now you rebuild," she said simply. "You figure out who Rose Patterson is when she's not being everyone else's solution to their problems." That night, Rosa came over with takeout from our favorite Chinese place and a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. "Is this a special occasion?" I asked as she uncorked the bottle. "Honey," she said, "you just got your life back. If that's not special, I don't know what is." We ate lo mein and talked about everything except the trial. Rosa told me about her granddaughter's school play, about the new tenant moving into 4B who played saxophone at odd hours, about the community garden project the building was considering for the roof. Normal things. The kind of conversations I'd forgotten were possible when you weren't constantly managing other people's crises. "What are you going to do with all your free time now?" Rosa asked as we finished our wine. Free time? When had I last had free time? When had I last made plans that weren't centered around someone else's needs? "I don't know," I admitted. "I've been so busy being everyone else's mother, I'm not sure I remember how to just be Rose." "Then that's where you start," Rosa said. "You remember who you were before you forgot you were allowed to matter." But the hardest test was still coming. Because just when I thought the worst was behind me, just when I was starting to believe I might actually be able to build a new life based on self-respect instead of self-sacrifice, I discovered that some betrayals run deeper than money. 2 weeks after the trial, I was coming home from grocery shopping when I ran into Mrs. Chen from the 3rd floor. She had an uncomfortable expression on her face, like someone carrying bad news she didn't want to deliver. "Rose," she said hesitantly, "I think there's something you should know." She handed me a folded newspaper, not one of the major dailies, but a local community paper that covered neighborhood news and minor court cases. There, on page 3, was a small article with my name in the headline. "Local mother takes son to court over family loan dispute." The article was brief, but devastating. According to the anonymous family sources quoted in the story, I was a vindictive old woman who had called the police on my own son over a simple misunderstanding about money. The writer suggested that I might be suffering from age-related confusion about the arrangement I'd had with my son, and that family members were concerned about her mental state and her ability to manage her own affairs. The article made it sound like I was an unreliable narrator of my own life. A confused elderly woman who'd turned a family disagreement into a legal nightmare because I couldn't understand that adult children sometimes need financial help from their parents. Every fact had been twisted just enough to make me look like the villain in my own story. The years of financial support became generous gifts that she now regrets. The theft became a misunderstanding about family money. The assault, Michael hitting me, wasn't mentioned at all. But the worst part was the implication that I was mentally incompetent. That my family was concerned about my ability to manage my own life and make my own decisions. The groundwork was being laid for them to claim I needed a guardian, someone to manage my finances and make decisions on my behalf. Someone like my loving, responsible son Michael. I sat on my couch reading that article over and over, feeling the familiar panic rising in my chest. This was character assassination disguised as concern. A public relations campaign designed to discredit me as a witness to my own abuse. The old Rose would have panicked. Would have called Michael and Lisa immediately, begging them to fix this, to call the newspaper and correct the record, to make the bad publicity go away. Would have offered them anything, money, apologies, complete capitulation, just to make the humiliation stop. But I wasn't the old Rose anymore. I folded the newspaper carefully and set it aside. Then I made myself a cup of tea, sat back down on my couch, and thought about what this meant. They were trying to destroy my credibility because they couldn't destroy the facts. The court had found Michael guilty because the evidence was overwhelming. So now they were trying a different approach, making me look like an unreliable old woman who couldn't be trusted to tell the truth about her own life. The strategy was sophisticated and cruel. And it told me everything I needed to know about how my children really saw me. Not as their mother, not as a person deserving of basic respect, but as an obstacle to be overcome. A problems to be managed. A reputation to be destroyed if necessary. I thought about Tom, and what he would have said about all this. Tom, who'd taught me to change my own tire, to balance our checkbook, to stand up for myself when the world tried to push me around. Tom, who'd believed I was strong enough to handle whatever life threw at me. "You're tougher than you think, Rose," he used to say when I doubted myself. "You just forget sometimes." I wasn't forgetting anymore. The phone rang, Lisa's number on the caller ID. I let it ring 6 times before I answered. "Did you see the article?" she asked without preamble. I saw it. "We need to do damage control. This makes our whole family look bad." Our family. As if we were still a unit, still a team working toward common goals instead of adversaries fighting over my right to basic dignity. "What kind of damage control did you have in mind?" I asked. "You need to call the paper and tell them you were confused, that you didn't mean to press charges, that this was all a big misunderstanding. Maybe we can get them to print a retraction." There it was. The same pattern that had controlled my entire adult life. Something goes wrong, Rose fixes it. Someone gets hurt, Rose apologizes. Someone needs rescuing, Rose pays for it. But this time, the person who needed rescuing was me. And the people I needed rescuing from were my own children. "No," I said calmly. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I'm not calling anyone. I'm not apologizing for telling the truth. And I'm not pretending this was a misunderstanding when we both know exactly what happened. Mom, you don't understand what this could do to Michael's reputation. To mine. People at my job might see this. My kids might hear about it at school. My kids. Lisa's children, my grandchildren, who I barely knew because Lisa had moved across the country years ago to get away from what she diplomatically called family drama. The grandchildren who called me maybe twice a year, always prompted by guilty parental reminders rather than any genuine desire to maintain a relationship with their grandmother Rose. Maybe they should hear about it, I said. Maybe they should know what happens to grandparents when their adult children decide they're worth more as a bank account than as a human being. "You're being ridiculous. And selfish. This isn't just about you." She was right. It wasn't just about me. It was about every elderly parent who'd been financially abused, emotionally manipulated, and then gaslighted into believing they were the problem. It was about the normalization of treating older adults like their only value lay in what they could provide for younger family members. "You're right," I said. "It's not just about me. It's about everyone who's been taught that love means accepting abuse, that family means never setting boundaries, that being a good parent means funding your adult children's mistakes until you have nothing left." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Then, "If you don't call that newspaper, don't expect to hear from us again." "I don't," I replied. "I expect to hear from you when you're ready to treat me with the same respect you'd show any other human being." And not a moment before. I hung up and turned off my phone. The silence in my apartment was profound. For the first time in 45 years, I was completely cut off from my children by my own choice. It should have felt devastating. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in decades. I was 73 years old, and I was finally learning how to be free. The next few months were the strangest of my life. Without the constant anxiety about my children's latest crises, without the phone calls demanding money I couldn't afford to give, without the guilt about never doing enough for people who never seemed satisfied with anything I did, I had to figure out who Rose Patterson actually was. It was harder than I'd expected. For so long, my identity had been completely wrapped up in being everyone else's solution. Michael's mother, Lisa's mother, Tom's wife, my own mother's daughter who never quite lived up to expectations. I'd been so busy being what other people needed me to be that I'd forgotten I was allowed to have needs of my own. Rosa became my guide in this strange new world of self-care and boundaries. She introduced me to her book club, a group of women who met twice a month to discuss novels and drink wine and talk about their lives without the conversations revolving around other people's problems. "What do you like to read?" asked Sarah, a retired librarian who'd become the unofficial leader of the group. The question stumped me. What did I like to read? For 20 years, I'd been too busy working and worrying and solving everyone else's crises to read much of anything except the bills that arrived every month. "I used to love mysteries," I said tentatively. Before I got so busy with other things." Agatha Christie? Louise Penny? Tana French? The names were familiar, but I realized I hadn't read a mystery novel in probably 15 years. Too selfish, I'd told myself. Too frivolous when there were more important things to worry about. Like Michael's rent. Like Lisa's student loans. Like everyone else's problems except my own need for simple pleasure. Sarah pressed a paperback into my hands. "Start with this one," she said. "And don't you dare feel guilty about taking time to read it." That night, I settled into my reading chair, Tom's old recliner that I'd never allowed myself to use because it seemed too indulgent, with a cup of tea and Sarah's book recommendation. For 2 hours, I lost myself in someone else's fictional problems instead of my real family's endless dramas. It was the most relaxing evening I'd had in years. Around the same time, Rosa convinced me to try something I'd been wanting to do since I was a little girl but never allowed myself because it seemed too impractical, too self-indulgent, too expensive for a woman whose money was always needed elsewhere. Painting classes. The community center on Amsterdam Avenue offered watercolor workshops for seniors every Thursday afternoon. The instructor was a patient woman named Maria who somehow made even my clumsy attempts at painting flowers look like they had potential. Art isn't about perfection, she told me after I apologized for the third time for my shaky brush strokes. It's about expression. It's about giving yourself permission to create something just because you want to. Permission to create something just because I wanted to. What a revolutionary concept. I painted flowers and cityscapes and abstract swirls of color that didn't look like anything except the emotions I was feeling. For the first time in decades, I was doing something purely for my own enjoyment, without having to justify the expense or the time or the fact that it served no practical purpose beyond making me happy. The woman in the mirror started looking different. Less worried, less worn down by constant stress. My shoulders weren't permanently hunched from carrying everyone else's burdens. My hands, no longer shaking from anxiety about the next financial crisis, grew steady enough to hold a paintbrush without trembling. But the biggest change was in how I thought about my apartment. For years, it had been a place to house other people's emergencies, a couch for Michael to crash on during his frequent relationship breakups, a phone to receive Lisa's complaints about her job and her marriage and her perpetual dissatisfaction with life, a bank account to raid whenever anyone needed money they hadn't earned. Now it was becoming my sanctuary. I bought bright yellow curtains for the kitchen windows and hung some of my watercolor paintings on the walls. I rearranged the furniture so everything wasn't positioned to accommodate visitors who might need a convenient place to ask for favors. I filled the apartment with plants and books and soft jazz playing in the background, things that made me happy instead of things that made other people comfortable. Rosa started dropping by most evenings, not because either of us needed anything, but simply because we enjoyed each other's company. We'd sit on my small balcony overlooking the street, drinking wine and talking about books and politics and all the places we wanted to travel now that we were free to think about our own desires instead of everyone else's demands. "I've been thinking about that river cruise through Europe," Rosa said one evening as we watched the sunset paint the buildings across the street in shades of gold and orange. "The one where they stop in all those little villages with the flower markets and the medieval churches." "That sounds wonderful," I said, and realized I meant it. For the first time in years, someone else's dream sounded like pure pleasure instead of another obligation I couldn't afford to fulfill. "Want to come with me?" she asked casually, as if she were asking me to go to the grocery store instead of inviting me on a trip that would have been completely impossible when I was busy funding everyone else's lives. I started to say I couldn't afford it, couldn't leave, couldn't justify the expense when there were more practical things to spend money on. All the old arguments that had kept me trapped in self-sacrifice for decades. But I could afford it now. The money that used to disappear into Michael's emergencies was still sitting in my bank account. The restitution from the court case had been paid in full. For the first time in 20 years, my financial resources belonged to me instead of being perpetually promised to someone else's crisis. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Yes, I'd love to come with you." That night, I looked online at river cruise itineraries, at photos of European villages I'd dreamed of visiting when Tom and I were young and thought we'd have decades to travel together someday. The someday that never came because there was always someone who needed us more than we needed each other, someone whose problems were more urgent than our own dreams. But I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was planning. The river cruise was set for the following spring, Barcelona to Budapest, with stops in France and Germany and Austria. Places I'd seen in movies and read about in books but never imagined I'd actually visit. 3 weeks of discovering parts of the world I'd always wanted to see, with a friend who valued my company instead of my bank account. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I tried to remember the last time I'd felt this excited about the future. It had been so long, I couldn't even pinpoint when hope had stopped being part of my emotional vocabulary. But it was back now, tentative but growing stronger every day. The only cloud on my horizon was the knowledge that somewhere in the city, Michael and Lisa were probably still furious about the court case and the newspaper article and my refusal to return to the old patterns that had kept them comfortable and me miserable. Part of me wondered if they'd changed at all, if they'd learned anything from the consequences of their actions, if they missed me the way I sometimes missed the children they used to be. But a larger, stronger part of me had stopped caring about questions I couldn't answer. I could only control my own choices, my own behavior, my own boundaries. What they did with the consequences of their actions was entirely up to them. And then, just when I thought I'd found my own footing in this new life of independence and self-respect, the final test arrived. It was a Saturday morning in March, almost 6 months after the trial. I was getting ready to meet Rosa for our weekly trip to the farmer's market when my building's buzzer rang. Michael's voice came through the intercom, tentative and smaller than I'd heard it in years. Mom? Can I come up? Please? I need to talk to you. My first instinct was to buzz him up immediately. 6 months of growth and boundaries dissolved in an instant, replaced by the old patterns of maternal worry and automatic accommodation. Was he in trouble? Did he need help? Was he hurt? But I caught myself before I pressed the button. This was exactly the kind of moment Rosa had warned me about. The moment when your old programming kicks in and tries to override everything you've learned about standing up for yourself. What do you want to talk about? I asked through the intercom. I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just because I want something. I've been thinking about what happened, and I know I was wrong. The words I'd been waiting to hear for 20 years. But now that he was saying them, I found myself skeptical in a way I'd never been before. How many times had Michael apologized over the years only to repeat the same behavior the moment it became convenient? Are you alone? I asked. Yes. Just me. I buzzed him up, but my hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. This was either going to be the conversation that rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, or it was going to be another manipulation disguised as remorse. Michael looked different when he walked into my apartment. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and clothes that looked like they'd been slept in. He moved carefully, like someone who wasn't sure of his welcome, instead of with the casual entitlement I'd grown accustomed to. Thank you for letting me come up, he said, standing awkwardly in my living room instead of throwing himself onto the couch like he owned the place. I didn't invite him to sit down. 6 months ago, I would have been bustling around making coffee and asking if he was hungry and generally treating his presence like the honor I'd always believed it to be. Now I just stood there, waiting to see what he had to say for himself. I owe you an apology, he began, and his voice cracked slightly on the words. A real one. Not because I want anything from you, but because I've been a terrible son and you deserve better. The words sounded genuine, but I'd heard Michael sound genuine before. Usually right before asking for money. Go on, I said. I've been seeing a therapist, he continued, looking down at his hands instead of at me. Court-ordered anger management, but it's been helpful. She's been asking me to think about patterns in my relationships, about how I treat people I claim to love. He looked up then, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just shame, but actual understanding. Mom, I've been using you my entire adult life. Taking your money, taking your love, taking your support, and never giving anything back except the promise that I'd change someday. I treated you like an ATM with feelings, and when you finally stood up for yourself, I hit you. The acknowledgement of the assault surprised me. In all his previous apologies, he'd always found ways to minimize or explain away the worst of his behavior. But now he was stating it plainly, without excuses. I hit my own mother, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman who worked herself to exhaustion to give me every opportunity in life. And then I stole from you. $30,000 that you saved from Social Security checks while I was spending your money on restaurants and vacations and things I wanted but didn't need. Tears were streaming down his face now, and the old maternal instinct screamed at me to comfort him, to tell him it was okay, to make the pain go away like I'd been doing his entire life. But I stayed where I was. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I know I've hurt you too badly for too long. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you. And I'm ashamed. Not just embarrassed or sorry I got caught, but actually ashamed of who I've been. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is the rest of the restitution money. I know the court ordered monthly payments, but I got a job, a real job, not one of my get-rich-quick schemes, and I wanted to pay it all back as soon as possible. I took the envelope but didn't open it. What kind of job? Construction. Manual labor. The kind of work I always thought I was too good for. He managed a weak smile. Turns out I'm not too good for anything. We stood there in silence for a moment, two people who'd shared a lifetime but suddenly felt like strangers to each other. Michael, I said finally, I appreciate the apology. I appreciate you taking responsibility for what you did. But I need you to understand something. He nodded, waiting. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. I'm not going to go back to being your safety net, your emergency fund, your solution to every problem you don't want to solve yourself. That part of our relationship is over permanently. I know, he said. I wouldn't want it back anyway. It wasn't good for either of us. And I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine between us just because you've apologized. Trust has to be rebuilt slowly, through actions, not words. I understand. Do you? I asked. Because in the past, you've understood a lot of things right up until the moment you needed something from me. He winced, but didn't argue. You're right to be skeptical. I've given you every reason not to trust me. There was something different about this conversation. In all his previous apologies, Michael had always been working toward something: forgiveness, money, a return to the old status quo where his problems became my problems. But this time, he seemed to genuinely understand that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt to their original specifications. "What do you want from me?" I asked directly. "Nothing," he said, and I could tell the word surprised him as much as it surprised me. "I wanted to apologize because you deserve an apology. I wanted to take responsibility because I should have done that years ago. But I'm not asking for anything. Not even my forgiveness?" He thought about the question carefully. "I'd like your forgiveness someday, if I earn it. But I'm not asking for it today. I know I haven't earned it yet." For the first time in our conversation, I felt a flicker of hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope I'd carried for decades, hope that he'd magically transform into the son I'd always wanted. But a smaller, more realistic hope that maybe, with a lot of time and a lot of consistent behavior, we might be able to build some kind of relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. "I have plans this morning," I said. "I'm meeting a friend at the farmer's market." "Of course." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Mom? I'm glad you stood up for yourself. I'm glad you didn't let me destroy you completely." After he left, I sat on my couch for a long time, thinking about the conversation. Was this real change, or just a more sophisticated manipulation? Was Michael finally growing up, or had he simply learned better techniques for managing me? I didn't know. But for the first time, I realized I didn't need to know. My well-being wasn't dependent on Michael's personal growth or lack thereof. My happiness wasn't contingent on having the relationship with my son that I'd always dreamed of having. I could hope for the best while preparing for the worst. I could remain open to the possibility of reconciliation while maintaining the boundaries that protected my emotional and financial security. I could love him without funding him. I could care about his well-being without making it my responsibility. The revelation was liberating in a way I couldn't fully explain. For 45 years, my emotional state had been tied directly to Michael's choices. When he was happy, I was happy. When he was struggling, I was miserable. When he needed help, I dropped everything to provide it. But sitting in my quiet apartment after his visit, I realized that the connection between his life and mine had finally been severed. Not out of anger or spite, but out of a healthy recognition that we were separate people with separate responsibilities. When Rosa knocked on my door an hour later, ready for our farmer's market expedition, I was still processing the conversation. "How do you feel?" she asked after I told her about Michael's visit. "Confused," I admitted. "But not anxious." 6 months ago, a conversation like that would have left me wondering what he really wanted, what crisis was coming next, how much it was going to cost me. Today, I just hope he means what he says. And if he doesn't? If he doesn't, it's his problem, not mine. Rosa smiled. Now that sounds like the Rose I know. We spent the morning wandering through the farmer's market, sampling fresh bread and buying flowers and talking about our upcoming river cruise. The sun was warm on my face, the crowds were friendly, and for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about my children at all. I was just thinking about myself, and it felt wonderful. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came the river cruise I'd been planning with Rosa. 3 weeks in Europe, visiting places I'd only dreamed about during all those years when my dreams were considered less important than other people's immediate needs. The morning we left for the airport, my apartment felt different somehow. Not empty, but peaceful. Like a sanctuary I was temporarily leaving but would be happy to return to. There were no last-minute phone calls from Michael asking for emergency help while I was out of the country. No guilt-inducing messages from Lisa about how hurt they were that I was wasting money on frivolous travel instead of sharing my resources with family. Just a quiet morning, a packed suitcase, and the anticipation of adventures I'd paid for with money that finally belonged to me instead of being perpetually earmarked for someone else's crisis. The cruise was everything I'd hoped for and more. Mornings on deck watching European villages slide past the windows, afternoons exploring medieval towns and flower markets, evenings dining with Rosa and the other passengers we'd befriended along the way. For 3 weeks, I was just Rose. Not Michael's mother or Lisa's mother or anyone's solution to anything. Just a 73-year-old woman discovering parts of the world she'd always wanted to see, with enough money in her bank account to enjoy it without anxiety. The woman who returned to New York in May was different from the one who'd left in April. More confident, more relaxed, more comfortable taking up space in her own life. The walls of my apartment were covered with watercolor paintings now, some from my classes, some painted during quiet moments on the cruise. Evidence that I was allowed to create things simply because I wanted to. Rosa and I looked through hundreds of photos from the trip, planning our next adventure, maybe Iceland in the fall, or a train journey through the Canadian Rockies. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I'd never allowed myself to consider when my time and resources belonged to everyone except me. That's when the second letter arrived. It was hand-delivered, slipped under my door while I was at my painting class on a Thursday afternoon in June. My name written in Lisa's familiar handwriting, the same careful script she'd used to write thank you notes for birthday gifts when she was small. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a printed email. Mom, Lisa's note began, I found this in Dad's old email account and thought you should see it. I owe you an apology too. The printed email was dated 3 months before Tom died, sent from his email address to Lisa's. The subject line read, Your Mom. Lisa, Tom had written, I'm worried about your mother. Michael has been asking her for money again, and she's talking about taking out another loan to help him. She won't listen to me when I try to tell her this isn't healthy for any of us. I know you think I'm being hard on your brother, but watching your mother work herself to exhaustion to fund his mistakes is breaking my heart. She's forgotten that she's allowed to say no, that love doesn't mean saying yes to everything. She's forgotten that she matters too. When I'm gone, promise me you'll look out for her. Not just financially, but emotionally. Don't let Michael drain her completely dry. She deserves to be happy in whatever time she has left. I read the email 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Tom had seen what I'd been too deep in the dysfunction to recognize. He'd tried to protect me from my own misguided version of maternal love, and I'd brushed off his concerns because I thought he didn't understand the depth of a mother's devotion. But he'd understood perfectly. He'd seen that what I called love was actually a slow form of suicide, and he'd tried to save me from it. Lisa's handwritten note continued, I found dozens of emails like this. Dad was planning some kind of intervention before he died. He was going to ask me to help him convince you to stop enabling Michael, to start taking better care of yourself. I was angry at you for taking Michael to court, but reading Dad's emails made me realize he would have been proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. I'm sorry I wasn't there to support you when you needed it most. I was so focused on keeping peace in the family that I forgot peace isn't worth anything if it requires one person to accept abuse. I'd like to visit if you're willing to see me. Not to ask for anything or to try to fix what happened with Michael, but just to spend time with my mother. The mother Dad was so worried about, and who I should have been protecting instead of criticizing. I love you, Mom. I should have said that more often when it wasn't complicated by other agendas. I sat on my couch holding Lisa's letter, thinking about Tom and all the conversations we'd had about the children over the years. How many times had he tried to tell me I was giving too much, sacrificing too much, enabling too much? How many times had I brushed off his concerns as a father's natural but misguided worry? He'd seen the future I was creating for myself, old, exhausted, financially devastated, emotionally drained, and he'd tried to warn me. But I hadn't been ready to listen then. Maybe Lisa was ready to listen now. I called her that evening, and for the first time in years, our conversation wasn't about managing Michael's latest crisis or defending family decisions or trying to maintain the illusion that everything was fine. I miss Dad, Lisa said after we'd talked for an hour about everything and nothing. I miss him too, I replied. But I think he'd be proud of both of us for finally having this conversation. Do you think there's a chance we could have a relationship that isn't about managing everyone else's problems? I thought about the question seriously. Could Lisa and I build something new, something based on mutual respect instead of maternal obligation? Could we be mother and daughter without all the historical baggage of family dysfunction? I'd like to try, I said finally. But I need you to understand that I'm not the same person I was a year ago. I'm not going to go back to being everyone's solution to everything. I don't want you to, she said. Dad's emails made me realize how much we were asking of you, how unfair we'd been. I want to know who you are when you're not busy taking care of everyone else. I'm still figuring that out myself, I admitted. Maybe we can figure it out together. Lisa visited in July, and it was the best time we'd spent together since she was a teenager. We went to museums and restaurants, took long walks through Central Park, talked about books and politics and travel plans. She admired my watercolor paintings and listened to stories from my river cruise without once suggesting that the money would have been better spent on someone else's needs. For 3 days, I was just a mother enjoying time with her adult daughter. No crisis to manage, no money to lend, no drama to smooth over. Just 2 women who happened to be related, getting to know each other as people instead of as roles in a dysfunctional family system. On her last evening, we sat on my small balcony watching the sun set over Manhattan. I want to apologize, she said, for all the times I made you feel guilty for wanting basic respect from your own family. For all the times I asked you to be understanding instead of asking Michael to be responsible. We all did the best we could with what we knew at the time, I said, and realized I meant it. Dad knew better. His emails, he saw what we were doing to you, and he tried to stop it. Your father loved us all, I said. He wanted the best for everyone. Sometimes that meant protecting me from my own tendency to give too much. I wish I'd listened to him while he was alive. You're listening now, I pointed out. That's what matters. Before Lisa left for California, she gave me a photo album she'd put together from pictures she'd found in Tom's old files. Photos of our family from better times, holidays when everyone was genuinely happy, vacations where we actually enjoyed each other's company, ordinary moments when love felt simple and uncomplicated. But looking through those pictures now, I could see the pattern that had been there all along. In every family gathering, I was the one serving food, cleaning up, managing everyone else's needs. Tom was usually helping me, but the children, even as adults, were seated at the table, expecting to be taken care of. The roles had been established early and maintained for decades. I was the giver, they were the takers, and everyone accepted this arrangement as natural and unchangeable. Until I finally changed it. Now it's been over a year since that September day when Michael slapped me and stole my life savings. Over a year since I learned the difference between love and enabling, between family loyalty and self-sacrifice, between being a good mother and being a doormat for people who should have known better. I'm 74 years old now, and I'm happier than I've been in decades. My apartment is truly my sanctuary, decorated with paintings I've created and filled with books I've chosen and furnished with comfortable chairs where I sit and think about my own thoughts instead of everyone else's problems. Rosa and I are planning our third trip together, New Zealand this time, to see the landscapes where they filmed those fantasy movies we both love. The money in my bank account belongs to me, earmarked for my own dreams instead of other people's emergencies. Michael and I have a cautious relationship now. He calls once a week, always on Sunday afternoons, and we talk about his job and the books I'm reading and the weather. Simple things. Safe things. He hasn't asked me for money in over 8 months, and I've started to believe that maybe, finally, he's learning to solve his own problems. I don't know if he's changed permanently or if this is just a longer phase in the same old pattern. But it doesn't matter anymore. My well-being isn't dependent on his personal growth. My happiness isn't held hostage to his choices. Lisa visits twice a year now, and our relationship has become something I never expected it could be, a genuine friendship between two adults who happen to be related. We talk about everything except Michael's problems, and she's never once suggested that I should fix whatever situation he's gotten himself into. The guilt has mostly faded. The guilt about saying no, about setting boundaries, about putting my own needs ahead of other people's wants. It took months of therapy and supportive friends and daily reminders that I'm allowed to matter in my own life, but somewhere along the way, I stopped apologizing for taking care of myself. The loneliness I feared never materialized. Instead, I discovered that being alone is very different from being lonely. I'm surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide. My book club, my painting class, Rosa and her extended circle of friends who've adopted me as one of their own. I've learned that family isn't defined by biology or obligation, but by mutual respect and genuine affection. That love isn't proven by how much you're willing to sacrifice, but by how well you treat each other when sacrifice isn't required. Sometimes I think about the woman I was a year ago, exhausted, anxious, broke, constantly worried about the next crisis I'd be expected to solve. She seems like a stranger to me now, someone I feel sorry for but can barely remember being. That woman spent 73 years believing that her worth was measured by her utility to other people. She confused enabling with love, martyrdom with virtue, and self-sacrifice with good parenting. She nearly died of stress and exhaustion and the peculiar kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who only care about you when they need something. But she was strong enough, in the end, to save herself. Strong enough to say no, to set boundaries, to insist on basic human dignity even when it cost her relationships she'd thought were fundamental to her identity. She was strong enough to choose herself, finally, after 7 decades of choosing everyone else. The sun is setting again outside my apartment window, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and rose. I'm sitting in my comfortable chair with a glass of wine and a book I'm reading for pleasure, and tomorrow I'm meeting Rosa to look at travel brochures for our next adventure. This is what happiness looks like when you're finally old enough and brave enough to put yourself first. When you stop apologizing for having needs and start insisting that they matter as much as anyone else's. When you realize that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself, and that relationship, like all the others worth having, is based on love and respect instead of fear and obligation. Have you ever found yourself giving so much to family that you forgot you were allowed to receive something in return? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? Tell me your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, and sharing it might help someone else recognize that they deserve better too. And if this story touched something in you, if it felt familiar in ways that hurt, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Sometimes the most painful journeys lead us home to ourselves, and if my story can help even one person find the courage to set boundaries and reclaim their own life, then sharing it was worth every difficult moment. The most surprising thing about standing up for yourself isn't how scary it is. It's how free you feel afterward, and how much better life becomes when you finally remember that you matter too.